On July 9th, President Biden signed a wave of executive orders targeted at strengthening the U.S. economy by aiming to, and I'm quoting from the press release, reduce the trend of corporate consolidation, increase competition, and deliver concrete benefits to America's consumers, workers, farmers, and small businesses. The president's directives had several issues specific to agriculture, including the livestock and animal feed industries. Welcome to Feedstuffs in Focus, our podcast taking a deeper look at big issues in the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries. I'm your host, Andy Vance. Thanks for joining us. In this episode, we talk with Feedstuffs and Farm Progress policy editor Jacqui Fatka about what the president's orders hold for the animal protein and animal food sectors. We'll discuss the Packers and Stockyards Act, rules related to product of the USA labels for meat, and getting the Federal Maritime Commission involved in enforcing rules on competitiveness in shipping goods and services in and out of the U.S. Jacqui, the president and the administration, I guess in general, unleashed a real broad range of issues and policy statements related to competitiveness in the economy. Big grab bag of policy statements across a wide range of industries. You and I are going to drill in on things specific to the livestock and animal agriculture and feed industries. Let's start with what I thought was maybe one of the biggest things, because it's been an ongoing issue that Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack has been working on kind of both times he's been in his role at USDA. And that's trying to deal with this Packers and Stockyards Act and GIPSA. Can you give us the highlights of what the president has asked USDA to do in his latest executive order related to this topic?
Yeah, so the executive order that the president actually issued on July 9th is not necessarily a surprise. He directed USDA to consider issuing new rules under the Packers and Stockyards Act. And this is actually something that Secretary Vilsack had mentioned a couple of weeks ago, and we've been reporting here on Feedstuffs about trying to make sure that what is going on is fair and competitive. And so some of what they will be looking at again is making sure that it's easier for farmers to bring and win claims if they feel like they are not being treated fairly. Some of that has to do with chicken processors from underpaying their farmers or being able to just take concerns to be able to challenge what they feel is maybe unfair marketing. And for instance, beef producers, some of that is how they do their marketing agreements, whether they're selling under a certain arrangement. And so this is the GIPSA rule, as we like to call it, is something that has been going on for decades of trying to make changes. And one of the last final things that Secretary Vilsack tried to do when he left office as the secretary under the Obama administration, and one of the first things that actually was stalled when Secretary Perdue came in, and they had tried to accommodate some of the industry concerns. And, this is something that has gone back and forth on how to make sure that you still allow some of the marketing arrangements and way producers have tried to make sure that they can obtain higher dollars, but also making sure that the processors aren't taking advantage of producers. And so how we see USDA come down with this, the executive order just directed USDA to do what we already heard Vilsack say that he was going to do. And so this will take time. This will take rules will have to be proposed. Then we'll have comments on the rules again. And then we would maybe adjust those rules based on what the comments are. So this is not going to be a quick process. This will take some time, just like it took almost 4 years for the Perdue administration under the Trump time in office to actually hold the rule, repropose a rule, get comments, and then take those comments into consideration. We're starting that process all over again now under the Vilsack's term again.
Yeah. So do you think there's appetite to get it done? I mean, obviously it's something, as you noted, that the secretary's been involved with. Clearly the administration is engaged in this issue. What's the legislative climate feel like, because you have this interplay between what the statute says and how USDA administers it. Do you think it's something that the department will be able to make meaningful change through the rulemaking process, or is there going to have to be some sort of legislative involvement at the end of the day?
So interestingly, the last time when Vilsack was in office for 8 years, part of the time during that 8 years, Congress had actually had some, we call them riders within the appropriations bill that prevented him from writing these GIPSA rules. So the GIPSA rules were actually originally called for in one of the farm bills. And then Congress actually came in after they saw what the administration was going to do. And they said, no, we're going to actually prohibit you from going forward on these rules. And so, actually, at the end of the Obama administration, that rider was not included. And so they were able to move forward on that. Now, so I think legislatively, they will be watching, how does USDA come out on this? How far do they try to restrict things or create an environment that actually is more harmful rather than helpful to the livestock sector, and how they really kind of, I say walk the line, right? Because you've got different interests that they're trying to make sure everyone is playing fairly, both sides. And so I think legislatively, they will be watching very closely how USDA first proposes this, and how they perceive the process moving forward. And that depends too on a lot on who is in office. If this comes out in 2 years and we have a big switch to the House and the Senate of Republican versus Democrat control, maybe that will change. But we do have a lot of bipartisan support on some of the issues that are facing the livestock sector.
Along the same lines of this question of Packers and Stockyards, the president directed USDA to consider issuing some new rules on this question of the product of USA labeling. An issue I think we've been discussing in one form or another the entire breadth of my career in agricultural media is how do we label where food comes from, whether it's from the USA or sourced otherwise. Was it produced here, processed here? What's all the different terminology mean? What's the latest movement on that front, and what the president's asking USDA to do?
So you're right. The country of origin labeling, cool as a lot of people know it, was something that had been attempted for many years. I've been writing for ag policy for almost 20 years, and for nearly all those 20 years, we've had some issues with this. And at the end of the day, W2O found that we couldn't make some of the claims that we were trying to do under cool of saying born, raised, and slaughtered in the USA. And so this product of the USA is something that has become the norm. But the problem with that is that product of the USA, most consumers assume that means born, raised, and slaughtered in the USA. But actually, it could mean born in Canada, raised in Texas, and slaughtered even in the US. And so whether that really translates to what consumers believe is a product of the USA, I think there is more support from domestic producers about making sure that that product of the USA label, it's a voluntary label. It's not something that is mandated, which that was part of the problem with cool from the world trade standpoint, was that it was mandated. But we have the ability here, USDA can label things to help educate consumers on what it is. And so being able to align the definition of what is a product of USA better with what consumers actually believe is something that I think everybody can get behind, and something that Vilsack has said that he is wanting to undertake. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association had actually petitioned for this several weeks ago. And so with Vilsack coming out and saying that they indeed will move forward with this, as well as this being included in this executive order from President Biden, is good news. I think it does help. We all want to make sure that the food that we're producing here in the US is able to be consumed with the understanding of the fact that it is a product of the US. We do have a great interlocking system between Canada and Mexico and the US. And so making sure that that label does still allow for US producers to maybe have an extra premium for the fact that maybe it is born, raised, and slaughtered here all in the US, and being able to differentiate it from those that have, ground beef that's got some from Canada, some from Mexico, some from the US, and maybe not carrying that same product of the USA label.
Yeah, I think part of the reason this is so hairy is exactly what you described. The interlocking is right, how the system works. And sometimes it's there's you have to be careful what you wish for kind of notion. I think you start out with a policy that sounds like a really good idea. And then 20 years later, you realize you've been, hashing out the details for a long, long time.
Yes.
And unintended consequences come into play and so on. So that's a story we'll continue to watch, and we appreciate your coverage of navigating through all of it and where it goes next. Now, one of the other things I thought was interesting here, I want to shift maybe a little bit out of things that are directly applicable to livestock production and more the broader food animal and animal protein and animal feed industries. And let's go into the transportation sector for a bit, because we've been reporting all year long, it feels like, on some of the issues related to shipping agricultural commodities overseas and being able to import things as well. A lot of backup at ports, a lot of issues with container availability. The president tackled some of those issues in a series of orders as part of this grab bag of policy statements and executive actions. Bring us up to speed on what the president has asked the Federal Maritime Commission to do relative to shipments of various goods.
Right. So as you mentioned, after COVID, we saw just a huge kind of backlog of things that were just sitting out at the ports, and it was actually cheaper for these boats to go back empty than carry our ag products. And so when you talk about refrigerator products or meat products, and all of a sudden they're just sitting there, it is devastating to these industries. Think about a crate full of beef that's being ready to be sent over, and they say, we're going to take this boat back empty instead of taking that over. Well, these are perishable items. So you're looking at fruits and vegetables and a lot of high value products that are just now sitting in these ports, and it's basically we're just at the mercy of some of these markets and exporters being able to take our freights. And so this executive order from the president encourages the Federal Maritime Commission to, what they say, ensure vigorous enforcement against the shippers. And so there's been a lot of study of what's been going on, and we're trying to have more teeth into what they can actually require the FTC, give the power to the FMC, sorry, not the FTC, the Federal Maritime Commission, to be able to prevent them from charging, because that's part of it too, right? They say, no, we're not going to take your product, but it's sitting in port. So they're having to pay the fees for it to sit in the ports. And so being able to actually, this is adding up to thousands of dollars or even higher. And so as they are waiting for these products to go overseas, they're also not only losing money because they're not being paid for that product, they're also having to pay for that product to sit there. And so we will see how this actually is implemented and whether they can make a difference. They're trying to figure out a way to hold these exporters that are saying, no, we're not going to take your product, hold them accountable. If they've already said that they would do it, making sure that they are able to actually live up to those commitments. So yes, another important piece of this, of our markets, of being able to get our products overseas, but not be charged these exorbitant amount of fees when they're just sitting in the ports waiting to be loaded on boats and taken overseas.
You've been covering the secretary, for the entirety of his previous tenure as director of agriculture and secretary of agriculture, rather, and now early in his tenure. What's your sense of how quickly USDA will move on some of the things we talked about earlier, and then with the Maritime Commission, we've been talking about this issue of the shipments and what the industry has asked FMC to do. Are any of these things likely to happen yet this calendar year, or is the rulemaking process such that these are things we're going to be seeing stretch out into 22 or beyond?
Secretary Vilsack is definitely coming in and using as much authority as he can as soon as he can. And so, some of this, we talked about market concentration and the cattle industry. He's actually, like I said, he's July 9th, he was going to be making a visit to Omaha, Council Bluffs area, and was going to be talking about some additional money for building up small and medium-sized capacity and this goes back to that concentration issue. And some of that money has been allocated through the COVID package, and some of it's just what USDA already had, but he's trying to be really creative with what he can do with his authority. I think by the fact that he had been there for 8 years, he knows the ropes. He knows what needs to be done. When it comes to rules, it takes time. So part of that, maybe he could have a little less time required just from the mere fact that he spent the last part of his time trying to write that. But, he himself is not writing those rules. He's got great career staff that are helping do that. So these folks who have been there for all this time, I do feel like you have career staff, but then you also have some elected folks that have come in. And so how they take the direction from Vilsack, I think he's very clear on what he wants. He has always been a strong advocate for rural America and making sure that farmers are able to be profitable and making sure that we see a revenue stream that actually makes them able to stay in business, right? And so how he does that going forward, I think will be important. And yes, he might be able to accomplish it a little sooner than maybe he would have his first time around. And just from the fact that the career folks have kind of tried to write this role twice, right? So you would hope that if we're coming back, will we have a huge swing to the one way, or whether we'll kind of go back to what he already had? There's probably some of that in there in the first place. Just kind of that groundwork has already been done. So maybe that takes a bit less time to accomplish what they're hoping to accomplish.
For the latest policy news related to the food animal and animal feed production industries and how those trends and issues affect your business, subscribe to the Feedstuffs Daily e-newsletter and join us weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern, 1 Central for Feedstuffs 365. It's all part of your Feedstuffs subscription. I'm Andy Vance, and you've been listening to Feedstuffs in Focus. Thanks for joining us today. If you want to hear more conversations about some of the big issues affecting the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platforms, including Apple and Google Podcasts, or visit that website, feedstuffs.com, for future episodes. Until next time, have a great day, and thanks for listening.